understand. I get it. Try to make this a little interesting, a little fun. As we get into this, I like telling stories, right, and helping make sense of the things that we see, right, across the threat landscape. My name is Ausherman. I actually am an electrical engineer. I've been here at CrowdStrike for actually almost 6 years now. Slide's getting a little old. I'm getting older. Been 10 years in cyber. I started off, though, as an electrical engineer, and I worked for a company called Dow Jones. And whenever I say that, people are like, oh, you work for the stock market. No. Dow Jones does produce an index that the stock market uses to understand how well the market's doing overall. But Dow Jones is a publishing company. And most of Dow Jones is the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal is a huge, huge, huge OT environment. An enormous printing press, mailroom, pre-press systems. Everything in there is driven by PLCs, contactors, relays, very much an OT environment. 2003, and I'm sharing this story because it was actually 20 years ago today, yes, I'm old, that I was sitting working on as fresh-faced kid just out of college. I mean, brand spanking out of college, and I was working for Dow Jones, and we're replacing these PLCs, and we're putting in these servers that were production information management servers. The point of those servers was to collect data from the PLCs, and I saw the blue cables coming in. And I was like, that's probably a bad idea. Within about a month, yeah, a little closer. Oh, there you go. Within about a month, keep this up close. Within about 1 month, I was sitting on one of the servers, and I noticed how slow it was running. Pulled up Task Manager, and this really oddly named process I see running. So I whack it, it pops up again. I'm like, all right, it's a watchdog. So I figure out the other process, I whack it, kill it, run the semantic stinger tool, which was available back then, and it came up with MS Blaster. It's a blaster worm. The blaster worm, luckily, wasn't that dangerous. Whenever I was the only one in the company to even sandbox a thing, and I sandboxed it by sticking it on to an old laptop and using Process Explorer and using Wireshark to see what it was doing. And it was really just spamming the heck out of Windows updates. Anyway, it was the first time that I looked at malware as an engineer. It was the first experience kind of moving in this direction of cybersecurity. That was like, this thing was collecting email addresses off of my server to send itself out. That's personal identifiable information. That's really creepy. The fact that it can collect the data itself and use it was scary. It was the first time I kind of realized that this thing with malware was very real, and it wasn't just about damaging or breaking something. These folks actually wanted something. Now, here we are. Fast forward 20 years later, they still do want something. Well, it worked once. There we go. So let's dive into, off a little bit, but we're going to talk first a little bit about credentials, buying credentials, acquiring credentials really, and then we'll get more into the RMM tooling. So the trends we saw from last year, increase on vulnerability exploitation, right? I think we tend to see that quite often anyway. Increased activity for identity broker markets, and also faster breakout times. Year over year, we continue to see adversaries moving faster. They get better tooling, they get smarter, they understand environments better, right? Active Directory has been a very common, in the past 3 years, been a very common attack vector once the proficiency came up, and now it tends to be more in our cloud environments with some of the younger threat actors. But breakout times are faster. How does some of these things even begin? We think about somebody dumping LSAS or buying things on the market. It's not always that way. This one instance of home access, it was a DevOps engineer, and they were using a cloud-based password manager like everybody else tends to use, especially at home. What's the harm? I don't like it at work, but at home it's not a big deal. But they can get accessed pretty easily. Well, and this was, by the way, this person in DevOps is very active in social media, so they're kind of a good target. So the adversary gained access to the machine, permissions, dump creds, and then they started searching for other things, and they came up with a decryption key for AWS accounts, and then they're able to establish persistence in AWS afterwards. So Lily moved from a home machine to a corporate environment in the cloud, one of the places that we're really not looking a whole lot at still today. That's one way of doing it, right? Access brokers are clearly another way of doing it. Going back to this also reminds me of another story where not too long ago, a very large major company, when a threat actor was trying to identify how to get into this person's environment, how to get into this company's environment through this person, and it's a high-level executive, and they found, because they were intercepting emails from this executive, they found that they had a rewards program, right? Through that rewards program, easy to break into that. Apparently it uses the same credentials for a lot of other systems as well. And the adversary got in that way, simply by figuring out the credentials for the rewards account. So now again, going back to access brokers, I think we've probably all heard about access brokers, right? We know who they are. They are selling credentials. They sell them for different rates. They sell them in bulk. They sell them individually. If it's something that, it's a high-level executive at a very high-profile company, of course it's going to cost more. This is a market. There are tens of thousands of these folks doing this. They hire people come in and out of these jobs all the time. The access broker boom has really been happening probably in the past 5 years, I would say. In the past 5 years, we started seeing that, every month over month, some months greater, there's going to be an increase in this activity, right? In the advertisements that we're seeing across some of the darker portions of the web. In 2022, we started seeing a lot of upticks in certain things like, academic, technology, industrials. Technology has been a big vector for a couple of actors recently as well. So the technology sector and manufacturing as well has been seeing a big uptick in attacks. Now, that last quote down there is pretty much a true story. 80% of all breaches use compromised identities, and about half the organizations have seen 80 attacks in the past 2 years, and the vector has become more popular, 100%. And I don't know how many of you have ever administrated an Active Directory environment, read the Microsoft books on it. Pretty much like a lot of other things with Microsoft, as I was running a business as an MSP or doing anything else, it terrified me, some of the things I was able to do. We won't even get into PowerShell remoting in Azure AD. That's even scarier. All right. Other ways of getting this information is the rise of info stealers. How many in this room have heard of Raccoon Stealer? Yeah, you probably all saw the guy and his girlfriend who had escaped from the Ukraine. I can't remember where they were. They were in Czechoslovakia maybe, and they got caught. Mostly because she was posting pictures of both of them in freedom, right, or so to speak. And they got caught by locating where they were based on her pictures on social media, on Instagram, actually. So this stealer came back up again, and it's a monthly subscription, interesting enough, for just a little as $200 a month. You can have a subscription to Raccoon Stealer. This thing is nasty. It's pretty nasty. If you've really seen Pegasus spyware that's on mobile devices nowadays, you've probably heard the horror stories of that. I mean, this is really just a desktop version of it. It's going to steal all the system info, right? It's going to, so if you do like sysinfo, list all that out, same thing, it's going to dump all that, give you lots of good details about the system, clearly. Cred safe in browser, cookies, crypto wallets, arbitrary files, IAM keys have been hugely attacked by Scattered Spider and Lapsus and some of these other groups that have been targeting our cloud infrastructures. Now this tool actually exfils data to a C2 where the subscriber, the $200 a month person, can just log in and look at the assets, look at the passwords they can buy, and they're looking at everything that was scraped from their deployments. Now, Raccoon Stealer version 2.3 has improved quite a bit. If you want to see how mature these products are, which is very interesting that this came from a younger individual in the Ukraine just a few years ago, but now has better operational tracking. You see where your attacks have landed and how successful they are. And then you see reputation scoring. If I'm going to, of course, use a username and a password, if I'm going to use valid credentials, I want to be sure they're pretty confident, right? Because you probably only have one shot in a lot of cases to try to get into the system that you're trying to get into. But they're giving lots of great information. If this wasn't in Cyrillic, I guess it would probably make a little bit more sense, but it's the best screenshots you can really get. Mostly Ukrainian and Russian actors using those tools right now. So let's talk about some of these adversaries real quick, because clearly there's people that are doing this, right? Who's behind stuff like Raccoon Stealer? We saw that person go to jail, but who tends to use these tools? Lapsus was a self-name for who we refer to as Slippy Spider. If anyone understands CrowdStrike intelligence, anything that's a spider is an e-criminal, basically. And so that cryptonym goes as whoever discovered that criminal gets the name, the first part of the cryptonym, and then the second part's always a spider. And that's just for e-criminals. Nation states have a different convention. So what they do mostly, of course, is extortion. Interestingly enough, hardly ever ransomware. Ransomware just being one form of extortion, right? They tend to use, to purchase credentials from access brokers, right? They do post a lot on Telegram, right? And they emerge, including Team Immortal in the more recent showings of them. But typically they'll use like Slack cookies and off-the-shelf tooling. They have used Redline Stealer and Raccoon Stealer as well. They'll use commodity malware. They started getting a little bit more into the RMM tooling that we'll talk about as we move forward. Not nearly as much as their older cousin, Scattered Spider, but they are starting to use it. And their kids, they've literally claimed that they're largely doing it for the memes. It's a true story. All right, let's get into the legitimate rat RMM tool usage. RMM tools, I'm sure you've all used them, right? And this kind of takes me back to my story that I started off with 20 years ago. On those production information management servers, one of the other things that I noticed that was terrifying was they all came with VNC server running on them, on the image that they came with. Clear password, no password. And I questioned immediately, I said, why on earth would we not control, at least with username and password, access to a remote system the same way we would do with a local system? If I log into my my workstation, I got to put in a username and password. Why is this clear password? Absolutely terrifying. And I knew then, like, you can use RMM tools. When I owned my own business, I knew how scary those things could be. They have a lot of capabilities. In fact, I used one called LabTech to run my entire business. And with any Visual Basic scripting, you can pretty much make it do what you want. So that's a more powerful one. But what about the ones who are just more like a remote desktop tool, right? Remote desktop software, RDS. It's still an RMM tool. Tools like Atera, especially, has gained a lot of capability behind it. It's not just remote desktop and doing a few things remotely. But clearly, AnyDesk, Screen ConnectWise Control, that's actually a component of LabTech. ConnectWise, who was a CRM tool that I also used back then, bought LabTech. TeamViewer, really popular, clearly, right? SplashTop, which comes bundled with other RMM tools. So the rampant usage of RMM tooling is you can blend into the enterprise noise. If you hunt for RMM tools in your environment, like I'm suggesting, you'll probably find them. And you'll probably find them because there's a lot of admins who use this software, and it's poor hygiene. So using this allows the actor to blend into the enterprise noise. Doesn't look like they're doing anything suspicious at all. In fact, even if anybody knew that somebody was using RMM tools in the environment, they probably just thought it was an administrator doing part of their job, because they didn't want to walk down the hallway. So at this point, in the past 2 years, we've seen that 14% of all interactive intrusions used RMM tools at some point. It's a number that I would expect to go up. It's already too high, in my opinion. One actor, Scattered Spider, utilizes numerous RMM tools. They don't use just one. It's actually about half of what they do. So let's talk about this adversary, Scattered Spider. So Scattered Spider, being primarily social engineering focused, they look to act like the help desk, right? And they call, and they've gotten very good at it. Accents, even if they, English accent, do a good American accent, they've got a lot of this down. There has been a scary report, by the way, of this specific actor recently almost pulling off a deep fake And as much as we joke about that not being real, they literally had one of the actors that were in that group literally joined a Zoom call and deep-faked the video. The answers to the questions were off, and there were things that didn't seem right. So somebody finally called this person out, and they couldn't legitimately answer who they were, right? So they cut them off the call. And after some time, realized like this actor was in their environment and had done that stunt. And they actually shut down the actor after this event and figured out, of course, that was them that was doing it. But these things are getting real. Social engineering is about to take a turn into some really scary technology. They're very focused on doing this. They're primarily focused on technology and telecom, but I mean, they'll attack who they smell blood, they'll attack. Custom malware is not something that they go to. I mean, it is literally off-the-shelf tooling, living off the land, binaries, and RMM tools. Ransomware payloads kind of rare, although we've seen them deploy ALF-V ransomware. If you've seen anything about Alpha Spider or ALF-V ransomware, those are some of the malicious executables that ended up in some of the more high-profile attacks that we saw recently. So they're known for leveraging weaknesses, like I mentioned, in help desk security. Right? This is where help desk security, best practices can really come into play. And I think too, from the social engineering aspect, I always say, all of our customers, the people who work in the company that we work for, that we're protecting, sometimes unintentionally, clearly, or can be our worst enemies. So any amount of education that we can provide to our users is probably the best way of keeping our company safe. Because as we move into stuff like social engineering, a deep fake, you have to train people to identify that. A tool is, at least at this point, not going to be very helpful. So going back a little bit further, there was a Bizarre Caller. This is a campaign that was delivered by a Russian e-criminal named Wizard Spider. They were very active a few years ago. But they socially engineer victims to engage with call center adversaries, right? So these are adversaries who pretend to be their call center, right? And then they convince them to install those RMM tools, which to them it's just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to install BombGuard or TeamViewer. I know what that is. It's fine. Still seems like the help desk would ask you to do something like that. Kind of brilliant, to be honest, but terrifying. So with that, the adversary gains access to the machine, gains access on objectives, right? During this campaign, there was a lot of money lost by our corporate America. Another thing that we've seen, and something that can be good to examine more closely, are scripts that may not actually be doing something malicious within itself, but are being used for this type of activity. And if you look at this script, basically just using the built-in, the native web client through PowerShell, call it, right? Call that down, install it, put it in a strange directory. Program data is not the typical directory for it. Install it silently, and then set a password to it. Okay. I don't know administrators that typically would install any desk in that fashion. I'm sure you all don't either. So, of course, this is a really good piece of information to look for. And then, of course, hiding persistence in an uninstall registry location. All right. And we've seen a dramatic increase in adoption in RMM tooling just in the past 2 years, right? Well, 2021 to 2022. And it's grown even more this year as well. But if you look at it, there are, like, literally the number of incidents overall are almost 4 times. And the different types, the variety of RMM tools that were being used have doubled. It's almost as if, these great admin tools that we, of course, at one point in time used to help us get our jobs done have really been turned against us. But they are very capable, they're very available, and they don't set off detections. So why not use this instead of like a remote access tool that you might get from the dark web somewhere, or another virus? You already have remote access tools legitimate rats, is what I call them, that you can use that don't get detected. Why not use them? I think we'll see that more. Now, going back to why it's exploded, I mean, look at that robust feature set. I mean, for like Atera, gives you abilities to do online backups. You know, you're doing device management. You're seeing all your devices. You're not just connecting to like one. It's like literally, it's more of an RMM tool and less of an RDS tool. The best part is, it's free. Not only do you have a legitimate rat that you can use that doesn't get you caught, why would you go pay for one? Well, most do. You saw like some of the other tools that would come along with like Raccoon Stealer, for example. You're paying for all that bundled together. So, creating detection templates, right? This is a little tricky. This is why it's good to hunt and not try to detect in every case. Although I'm sure there's some clever means for you to be able to write detection. There are customers that have right now that have created custom detections and custom blocking for these tools because it's just poor hygiene. They don't want it in their environment. But you can't just detect every launch. I mean, look at how many, and this is just from our perspective, CrowdStrike's install base. I mean, that's a lot. You know, almost 350,000 executions from the primary binary within 24 hours. I mean, not really going to sift through that noise very well. So, what's a better way of doing it? Some valuable hunting ideas, right? We saw a program data directory. Very wrong, right? So suspicious installation directories, that's going to be a great place to start, right? If you're hunting for these things, make sure your query is defining the fact that I don't want to see standard installation locations. Doesn't really make sense. Non-standard installation parameters. Running it silently, you know, it's there for a reason, but it's probably not, I don't know too many administrators that would run an RMM tool or, you know, a remote desktop software from the command line anyway. Maybe they have it scripted, but running it silent, yeah, okay, I can still buy that. But then when you start applying a password, right, or you're applying a registry key location, why would you even need to do that? The software can apply its own, you know, reg key locations for its functions. Looking for rare parent processes. So I would expect mostly AnyDesk, for example, to launch from Explorer.exe, right? Something that you would totally expect. Not WMI, not from, you know, command line, for sure. Who's running AnyDesk from command line? Or opening it that way? Nobody's opening it that way. So parent processes that are rare, looking for those outliers can start to identify the malicious activity. So, you know, plan for the high prevalence. I mentioned this already. If you're going around and looking, you know, in your environment for RMM tools, effectively you're going to see there's going to be, you'll probably find them, there may be a lot of them. That's because there's a lot of administrators, of course, that will use this stuff. You'll have users who shouldn't use it, but they do use it. But, I mean, it's not malicious software, right? So maybe they're not in trouble for using it, but that does mean it's in your environment. So what better than to install something like, I don't know, AnyDesk, Atera, or LogMeIn, right? If you don't have to, it's already on the host. Just use it, right? Like any other LLL bin. All right. Talk about a couple of stories from the front line, and then we'll wrap it up. So I like the stories better. I think they help make sense, and I always have stories that I get from the intelligence I see, whether it's Ausherman, whether it's CrowdStrike, whatever. Intelligence is how we build incredibly intelligent detections. It's what allows us to know the things we don't know, clearly, right? I would say that the highest fidelity detections are clearly built from the best threat intelligence. So let's talk about this one case. So Alpha Spider, and I mentioned Alpha V ransomware because this is all stuff that's very recent, so I like being with current events. So this this affiliate, so it's not, so Alpha Spider is a ransomware as a service actor. They don't actually do the ransoming. It's rare that they do the ransoming themselves. They'll sell it, they'll sell the access, they'll sell the software, and say, here's your access to a UI, to view all your deployments, and so they provide all this stuff to some affiliate. We currently think it's Scattered Spider because they've been extremely bonkers active lately. And so they deployed it as a VIB file. So they're going around trying to encrypt ESXi hosts is what they're doing, right? Way better than encrypting a VM. What's the point of that? It's blow it away. You encrypt the ESXi software operating system that's actually running it, you have a problem, right? So as we go through this, we're going to try to first understand the threat, how to hunt your telemetry for evidence, and then think about how you would create net new detections and plays from this. That's the goal of using threat intelligence, operationalizing the threat intelligence. So let's start to understand the threat. In this quarter, Alpha Spider had an incident in which Alpha ransomware as a service gained access to a network and performed actions that are just known as big game hunting, right? They're moving laterally. They're getting all the assets that they want staged up so they can press the button, right? This activity included legitimate remote monitoring RMM tools for persistence and C2 operations. Wow. So they're using it to exfil data. Now, also in this case, they were leveraging compromised user accounts to access the victim's Azure and O365 cloud environments. And then they performed recon, deleted and exfiltrated data, and used a legitimate binary to encrypt Azure storage shares. Azure.exe is good at being able to get credentials, clearly too, right? Tokens for the storage file shares. Additionally, the adversary deployed a vSphere installation bundle, as we mentioned, right, to encrypt several of their ESXi hosts. So kind of going back a little bit, this actor had valid credentials. So they used those valid credentials to use RDP, just the native RDP controls within Windows, to move to a domain controller, that's where they actually deployed Atera, the RMM tool. That was included with that RMM tool was a tool called Splashtop. That's what the actor really wanted. They didn't care about Atera. The adversary used Splashtop to download additional tooling and exfiltrated to the adversary-controlled infrastructure. So they're leveraging Splashtop. Didn't care about Atera. It just came bundled, which was a smart way to get Splashtop on there. Splashtop's a little bit of a riskier software. So that's a better way of getting it onto a computer. Now, to collect those credentials, what the adversary did was enumerated this volume shadow copies on the host and said, all right, I want to dump the ntds.dit from one of those copies. That's all you need is one. And then they created a crash dump to get creds from there too. So they had multiple attempts to get information where they could get creds from. It wasn't like we're going to try to PowerShell into lsas.exe and dump that, and hopefully we're going to get something from it. They want to make sure they're going to get what they came from, do it in multiple avenues. One of the things this actor was doing too was building up profiles and changing passwords in the environment. So kind of going back to the valid credentials, sometimes you're creating valid credentials in the environment. It's interesting to think about how a lot of AD admins are not auditing this stuff. I mean, if you're the one creating the accounts for the environment, wouldn't you want to know when one was created? Well, maybe they weren't on your DC, going through, the ADF, the Active Directory, role to actually define the user, using that snap in to add a user in. No, that's not what they're doing. They're using net commands to add this user or to update the password. In fact, the adversary created a new account password called ADSync, which looks legitimate, and then added that user to several AD user groups. So within this, the actual adversary is escalating permissions by creating their own. So you don't have to leverage some CVE to be able to upgrade your permissions. So in here, consider monitoring for the creation and subsequent of new users, right, to existing AD groups. That is clearly something that shouldn't be happening from net commands on the command line, right? So hunting for this type of activity is a good precursor, right? So you kind of want to be further back, like, can I stop this earlier on? These are great things to look for. That last bullet, many of these ransomware operators, the big game hunters, almost every single time they're doing this, they're creating user accounts and adding them to pre-existing administrative groups. So this is a great thing to hunt for in your environment. All right, going back to Azure.exe. So enumerating the storage account keys, right? This is the clear case of what they're trying to do, right? Azure.exe tooling facilitates encryption of Azure file shares, but you can also use it to grab those keys. So a good thing to hunt for, that bottom bullet, Azure.exe can generate a high amount of, these listing storage key actions if you're running that command, right? If you're trying to list storage keys. So that's an anomaly. Look for that. If you see, if you're listing storage keys all the time, that's weird. That should not be happening. All right, going back to the ntds.dit. Sorry, it's Friday. It is at the end of the day. To collect credentials, the adversary used VSS admin, but not to try to blow away shadow copies or disable VSS admin to prevent some security control from doing its job. They did it so they could dump a file from the volume shadow copy, and then generate a crash dump, which then again you can pull credentials from that. So monitoring for credential dumping operations that targets VSS files is a good thing to do. This is actually something else that we've noticed that became hunting adversaries that deploy ransomware and that like to do extortion attempts outside of ransomware. They commonly dump creds from VSS files. So something else that's really good to look for. All right, just got a few minutes left here. Of course, you can hunt the reported IOCs. That's the low-hanging fruit, right? Do the easy job as well. Hunt the hash. Probably won't come up, right? You'll probably end up having a different hash value if you end up with anything like that in your environment. The thing that I like the most about this is that very last bullet that I put on here. Because hunting for those indicators is great. Baselining Azure.exe and some of the LLL bins, great. Look at this adversary host name. In any of your environments, have you ever seen the default Windows host name? I mean, maybe, but that's pretty rare, right? Your IT operations at this day and age are smart enough and good enough to say, hey, this is the employee number, or it's going to have this naming convention because we use it for this, and it's not going to have the Microsoft default desktop random name on there. So hunting for those basically unchanged default host names, good thing to do. Let's jump back to Scattered Spider. Last 2-3 slides and then we're done. Know thy adversary. This is absolutely huge. This actor uses RMM tools so much, it's almost like half of their attack. But they're using it for C2 as well as getting lateral movement within an environment. Multiple incidents attributed to this actor, which they were leveraging an XDR tool from a popular company. I'm not going to name them. I name Microsoft because it's their built-in Defender ATP, but they were using, which I consider Defender to be a LOL bin almost, like any other Microsoft's binaries, to deploy remote management and monitoring tools. So they were using other security tools to deploy tools. And you've probably all seen that within threat intelligence lately too. So it's up to our security vendors to make sure that, we're keeping your tools safe. All right, threat hunting. So, Scattered Spider TTPs, this is, of course, you can research this on your own and get details about, what they tend to do. But, on the very high level, RMM tools, creating new and local domain user accounts, changing the passwords, adding them to administrative groups. That's huge. They're doing that all the time. So hunt for those net use commands. That is very big. Attempting to reboot the machine in safe mode. Or better yet, I probably should have put safe mode with networking, because that's what they need. Attempting to tamper or evade with the EDR products. I think they all do that, but they are very specific about going after all the big names, including CrowdStrike. Auditing credential updates to detect unexpected password changes. So password changes happen because it's an administrative function. It times out. Usually the IT folks through Run Your Active Directory, they have a handle on this type of stuff. So what do the outliers look like? Hunt for unexpected password changes, of course, net use commands, kind of low-hanging fruit there, right? And then monitor user login attempts, right, to detect lateral movement. UEBA solutions can do a good job at that. There's a whole host of identity solutions out there today. Good stuff. The last two things here, and I'll be done. Audit credential updates to detect the unexpected password changes. Again, going back to that, that is enormous. Monitor user login attempts to detect lateral movement. Just kind of recapping this stuff again. And leverage IP allow listing to prevent unauthorized access to relevant security tooling. All right, and with that, we got through it. And I was a little bit fast because I was late starting. Sorry for that, everyone, and thanks for your time. You can now get to your happy hour.